So what is the main issue for today? It is about peptides, RRM and RRMD. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few moments. So in this presentation, I prepared a few subjects, like how do we calculate frequencies on DNA? How could that be effective? And effective not only for DNA, but also for peptides, proteins, and of course enzymes. How are these frequencies calculated? What is überhaupt RRM and RRMD? So in the Spooky database are a new few sections, and these sections contain a large amount of frequencies. And I developed myself something extra. It is the pre-run intracellular, which makes the peptides somewhat more effective than they are already so effective. And we'll take a look at all those peptide presets and also at the databases for RRM and RRMD. Why should we believe that frequencies will rule DNA in biology? Well, I found an interesting document in the normal archive for medical information, and it says here DNA is a fractal antenna in electromagnetic fields. So DNA is an antenna. With an antenna, you can receive and send signals. And that signals will operate especially on DNA. We'll take a look at that. Why is DNA so effective in electromagnetism in biology? So if you type in Google the question, is DNA a fractal antenna? You get immediately the answer. And that was a concept that was invented by Martin Blank and Reba Goodman, because DNA has a coil structure. And you know probably from electromagnetic laws that a coil, when you wind a copper wire and put a battery on it, then a magnetic field will rise. And so they argumented that if the DNA has a coil structure, that could be susceptible for electromagnetic fields. Why it is a fractal antenna? What is the nature of a fractal antenna? Well, it is self-similar, even in atomic scale. Because it is a fractal-like geometry, and that is enforcing the field. To make a comparison, the first mobile phones, they had a large antenna, maybe half a meter or longer. And then later on, there was some short antennas. In 2000, I did buy my first GSM mobile phone, and it has a very small antenna, like, let's say 4 or 5 centimeters. When I was introduced into the classroom for the ICT business, they laughed at me. How do you come with that old refrigerator in the classroom? Because everybody has a smartphone except for me. But today they have very small antennas inside your mobile phones. It's like the size of a stamp, a post stamp. Why is that? Because there is a geometry in the print on the post stamp that makes that effective, emitting a field, and that is captured by the antenna. So DNA is a helix double-winded, and it is able to conduct electrons and to conduct an electromagnetic force. So DNA is a supercoil. Here at the right side, you see the DNA forms a double helix. A double helix, well, that makes a very strong force to keep that two helix forms together. But at the end, you will see that it is supercoiled, which means that around the histone proteins, it is winded up again. and all those histones will be wound up again and again and again, and then it will form a supercoil. If you roll out our DNA structure, all the chromosomes together will form an antenna of, let's say, 2 meters. But it will not fit into our cellular nucleus. Yeah, so it must be rolled up to make it very small and compact to fit into the size of a cell. But nevertheless, it is conducting a specific electromagnetic field, and that is why DNA is so effective. And why is DNA so affecting an electromagnetic force? Because it is built up of all those individual rings. You see here cytosine, guanine, thymine, and adenine, which are the building blocks of the DNA. And the building blocks are held together by the hydrogen bridges, the dotted lines. So the dotted lines will keep the atomic structure together on those double helix. But inside the building blocks, you can see here the ring structures. And that ring structures give a specific freedom for the electrons to rotate inside the ring. But what is then happening there? If an electron is rotating inside a ring, it becomes a rotating coil. A rotating charge will effectively have the success of creating a magnetic flux, a magnetic force, and that is a very strong, effective force. Yeah, perpendicular on the floor of the benzene ring. So you have here a ring and the upper drawing of 6 carbon atoms, and at the lower you can see the pyrimidine ring, which is 4 carbon atoms and 2 nitrogen atoms. And those forces are held together. I got this information from this book, DNA and Cell Resonance. Yeah, it's here on the right side. Yeah, so this is the book. This book, I can very encourage you to read this kind of book. Yeah, he has more books about this structure, but DNA and cellular resonance is the one that you can start with. It's the most easy book of this series. If you're interested in physics, this is the one to go. And he explains in his book that DNA will form a magnetic coil. So in this case, it's built up of a double helix. Yeah, you see here one of the coils, and all those coils are stacked together. So that means that the fields it will generate are strengthening each other. Yeah. So what is the speed of the coil? Here at the field speed is, let's say, c, which is the light speed. Okay, but it sees here one cycle up and down and up, and in the same time it will create a magnetic force. That is the red arrow. Yeah, so the red arrow will take a shorter path, yeah, and that is a 2.14 times smaller than the outside ring. That means that the speed inside the center is divided by 2.14. So it is the speed of light divided by 2.14, which is 140 times 10 to the power of 6 meters per second. That brings us to the size of a DNA molecule. One cycle is here the length of 3.4 nanometers. 1 nanometer is 1,000th of a micrometer. Yeah, and that says something about the structure of DNA. Yeah, and it is the ultimate carrier of the electrical force. And here you can see that all those magnetic fields are stacked together. Yeah, and all those fields will run along the helix. Yeah, and at the end here in the middle will run a magnetic field. Well, if you calculate the size, you see here, this is the double helix, yeah, one side up, one side down, yeah, and here you can see that is a histone, so that double helix is winded around a protein, and that protein is called a histone. Well, we can see here that there is a distance of 180 to 200 base pairs of the DNA molecule. Yeah, but the coil diameter is 10 nanometers. So one complete sinus wave is two windings left and two windings right. Yeah, that means if you calculate the size, then you can see that the average size of one winding around histones is 190 bases per histone, which leaves us to two histones, and that has a total path length of 126 nanometers. And that is important. If you know the length of the part, then you can calculate according to the speed what is the wavelength. Yeah, and if you see here in this picture the wavelength is 140 times 10 to the power of 6 meters per second. Yeah, and if you divide that on the frequency of the DNA, you see here it is the frequency of the DNA is 10 to the 15 hertz, which is more or less the ultraviolet frequency. Well, there is someone that has the name Fritz Albert Popp from Germany, and he did some tests, and he was able, with his super sensitive equipment, to detect the radiation from the DNA, and he was agreeing that the detection was ultraviolet radiation from the DNA. So he wrote a book. I can recommend this book if you can read German language. I hope that is also available in English, but don't know. I got here the German version. Biophotonen, neue Horizonten in der Medizin, written by Fritz Popp. And he did analyze the frequencies resulting from the DNA. So if this was a photon in ultraviolet range, yeah, he says that was generated by DNA. So that must be biological from origin. So he invented the name biophoton. Yeah, so first of all, I had the idea that biophoton was something that was ridiculous. It was not really true. But when I did read the books on physics, I was convinced that some must be very, very true, although it was ignored previously by the science. So if we go here from DNA to peptides, if DNA has a frequency, then also peptides and proteins must also have a specific frequency, depending on the nature of the building blocks itself. So we go step by step from DNA to a protein. First step is the transcription, which converts DNA into RNA. DNA is desoxyribonucleic acid, yeah, but RNA is ribonucleic acid. And the M says that it is messenger RNA, and that messenger RNA is post-processed, yeah, to optimize the code, and then it is by the ribosomes, yeah, translated into a amino acid chain. Yeah, that is very complex. And then after the production, it is error checked and post-processed to make sure that we will create only effective proteins. And the proteins that will not qualify as 100% okay will be destructed. Okay, and then in a later stage, number 5, it must be folded up. Why is that? Because the three-dimensional structure, how the protein is folded up, that is what makes them effective. Okay, why is that true? Because I have to draw a little drawing there. Yeah, let's take a new screen. Here I pick blue. Let's take a look. This is a line. This is a peptide or protein. Yeah, it has a start. Yeah, and an end. Yeah, and inside the string of the protein, there are charges. Plus, plus, minus, 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 plus, 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 minus, 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 plus, 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 minus, minus. So that is the charge of the chosen amino acid. Every amino acid has a specific electron charge. So what happens then? Yeah, let's take a red arrow. Plus and minus will attract, but plus and plus will repel. So that means that if you take a look at how it is organized in an effective protein, yeah, that it looks maybe something like that. Why is that? Because here the pluses and the minus will attract each other. So it will make a force between those links. And that is why the three-dimensional structure will be folded according to the charges. And there is a special mechanism for that to allow a protein folded. Yeah, and that makes the protein so effective. If the folding is gone wrong, yeah, then a mechanism should take it away and redo the folding or break down the protein. And if that is ready, then it is done, the folding, then the protein is production ready, but then it needs to be transported to the cellular location where the protein is needed. And therefore, there is a Golgi apparatus to do the logistics to keep it on a specific location where the protein is needed. Yeah, so every location in the cell has a specific amount of proteins in need, and then the production system will produce the proteins they need. And then the transport is already created to bring it to the location where it must be effective. So step by step, we can see that here in the nucleus is the translation done. Yeah, first of all, we start with DNA that is converted into RNA. Yeah, and then it is introduced here into the ribosome structures. Yeah, and then you can see that the ribosome structures, there is also here folding. Yeah, and then it is transported here in structures that can hold in the lumen of the Golgi apparatus, and then it will be split off, yeah, in vesicles, and then it can be transported into the cell or maybe externally to other cells. Let's say hormones, they are also proteins, are exported into the blood flow, yeah, to be effective in other organs. Yeah, but step by step in all those processings, we can follow the whole procedure, how it is done. That brings us to the question, what are then peptides? Peptides are short chains of amino acids. So there is a difference in naming style. Peptides are short, proteins are long. Peptides are shorter than 50 chains. Proteins are longer than 50 chains. Okay, so a peptide can be short or very, very short, but a protein can be very, very long. What is then an enzyme? An enzyme is also a specific protein, but it has also a specific task. Yeah, it has catalytic functions. What is a catalyst? A catalyst is something that promotes a chemical transaction, although that it is not taken into the production itself. Yeah, so it is a stimulating function for chemical reactions. So it will stimulate, not join the chemistry itself. Yeah, so peptides and proteins and enzymes are related. It is coming from the same production center. Here you can see how it is done. Here you can see the RNA here. This is the RNA. Yeah, and here you can see the chain is pulled in the ribosome. Here it is an entry. Yeah. This is the entry. Yeah, and this is the exit. Yeah, this is a transfer RNA, and this is the amino acid coming in. Okay, and every different amino acid is coupled to a specific coded transfer RNA. You see here the letters A, A, G. Yeah, and that is connecting to vanillin. Okay, so different styles of transfer RNA are related to different amino acids. So relating to the code, three-letter codes is connecting for one amino acid, and they form then a connection, a link between those two. And when it is done, then the transfer RNA will leave with empty hands. Yeah, it will leave the amino acid in the chain. So this is the production technique, and that is very interesting because a three-letter code gives us an enormous amount of entries that you can pinpoint a specific amino acid to a specific code. That makes the thing so intelligent, yeah, and that forms an intelligent structure to make a amino acid according to the code that we did read on DNA. So DNA is converted into a protein according to the code inside the DNA. Here you can see that peptides are short building blocks, and those building blocks could be easily drawn together because you have here the emittance of water, H2O, yeah, and it will bind the structure together, yeah, so it will bind those two molecules together to make one single molecule. Okay, so these are the individual amino acids. Short chains will be the peptides, but a long peptide range will form a protein, and the proteins will be folded to become an effective three-dimensional structure. And of course, the short peptide strings will already have a specific function. For example, here you see insulin. What is insulin doing? When connecting to a specific cell, the cell must be hungry for sugar. Then it will feel insulin coming by, and he puts an antenna in the air, and then the insulin will connect to the receptor, and then the door will come open and will leave the sugar from the bloodstream in the cell. When the cell has enough sugar, it simply throws the insulin loose, withdraws the receptor, and the insulin can go to the next cell. So in this case, the blood sugar will be accepted by the muscular tissue, and that gives the muscles their energy. So this will help anyone with need for energy, that the insulin will form the mainstream of the sugar flow into the muscular tissue. Yeah, if there is not enough sugar, there is a glucagon hormone. The glucagon is doing the opposite of insulin. Insulin is lowering the blood sugar because it needs to be absorbed by the muscles. But if this is not in the intestines anymore, not in the bloodstream anymore, then there is a reserved capacity inside the liver. And that could be freed up by the glucagon. It will increase the blood sugar. Yeah, so there is here a hormone like oxytocin. It will influence our stress level. They call it also the cuddle hormone. There is a vasopressin hormone. It will balance the water flow in the kidneys. And with the water flow in the kidneys, is also having influence on the blood pressure in the system. Here you see here the GLP-1 peptide will stimulate insulin, slows down stomach activity, and yeah, they make a specific medicine out of that. Here it's called Ozempic. Yeah, they have liraglutide, semaglutide, whatever they do, because they know there is a large amount of persons with obesity. Yeah, and if they stimulate that with Ozempic, yeah, they will slim down. But nevertheless, I've seen some patients with Ozempic. They slim down but grow old some faster. So it is not always that positive that was invented by the pharmaceutical industries. So peptides can have a signal function, but peptides can have also a function in the immune system, our defensinus, our catalysidinus, our lactoferrine peptides. So they can attack bacteria, they can have antimicrobial effective, uptake iron, because the lactoferrine pick up the iron from the food, yeah, will help to build blood in the red blood cells, hemoglobin, yeah, and it is also effective in the immune system. So peptides will already function even in that short peptide change as a specific target. They have also peptides for cell protection, antioxidants, yeah, like glutathione, like carnosine, like the heat shock peptides. All those peptides will protect our cells from degradation. Yeah, so they picture they pick peroxidases. That means very aggressive forms of oxygen will be taken away because otherwise the cells could be damaged. It is an antioxidant, yeah, and that helps our cells to keep integrity, yeah, and keep us healthy. And also production of tissue. So peptides can stimulate collagen. They can stimulate on insulin growth factor. They have creatine peptides. Yeah, all those peptides help us to keep in healthy tissue. Yeah, so collagen is in skin, in bone, in cartilage tissue. Yeah, insulin, like growth factor, stimulates muscle growth, works together with growth hormone, and of course with insulin together. Yeah, and creatine helps to stimulate muscle growth. Why is that? Because the muscle needs sugar, and creatine helps the cell to absorb the sugar. So your sugar metabolism is improving by the creatine. So we have seen multiple functions of all those different peptides, and our cells have thousands of that. Yeah, they create their own peptides when in need. So how do we come in peptides? We can create our peptides in the cells by our ribosomes. Yeah, but there are also maybe in the food. Yeah, like collagen. If we eat collagen, let's say my grandmother was very keen on bone broth. She makes that on a very soft, slow cooking mechanism. Yeah, she puts some bones of a cow or chicken in the soup, and then she draws very slowly by cooking that bones, and then if you drink that soup, yeah, it will stimulate your skin, your nails, your cartilage. So it is very effective. I've seen also two ladies in my practice. They were already prepared to undergo surgery. Two ladies with a knee operation in the future. I said to her, well, I think that you could be helped by collagen. Why is that? The collagen is creating a kind of speeding up the force. Let's take a look on this picture. This is your bone. So, and here there is another. Yeah, so there is here some cartilage tissue. Yeah, there is some cartilage tissue. Yeah, here's cartilage tissue. And here it wears out. If you grow older, the cartilage tissue itself has no blood vessels. So it must be generated by the lower tissues in the joints. So if the wearing out is faster than the building up, sometimes they have here a bone to bone. Okay, but if there is still a very thin layer of cartilage, yeah, if you eat bone, gelatin, yeah, then it will build up very easily. If it is already bone to bone, and the doctor can take a look with an echo or a Röntgen picture to take a look if the knee is completely bone to bone, then you lost your regeneration. But if there is a thin layer of cartilage tissue, then gelatin is offering you especially that proteins that needs to be built up here in this location. If you give here the gelatin to the joints, yeah, and those ladies, they did start to eat gelatin from the supermarket. Yeah, it costs only a few pennies, gelatin. It is a hard layer of gelatin. You can make it soft or in warm water and add some fruit juice for the taste. Of those gelatin, a teacup full, let's say 2 or 3 soup spoons every day after your dinner. And after 2 months, the ladies went back to the doctors and said here, oh, doctor, I think my knee is improving. I don't have any pain anymore. So the doctor sent them both to the hospital, make again a scan of those knees, and they sent them home without any operation. Why is that? Because they said the bone was healed. Yeah, the joint was healed again, simply by eating gelatin. So the peptides offered in the diet simply accelerates the process of building up. Yeah, and the same is with lactoferrin for the immune system, the Y peptides from milk. It will stimulate muscle growth. Glutathione is produced inside the cell, but also they sell it as a supplement. Peptides from meat or fish will lower the blood pressure. Casozepine is from milk and cheese. It's a neuropeptide. So all those peptides are already available in the diet. So if you have a very normal diet, yeah, but please do me a favor, eat at least, if available, eat bio. That's important. Yeah. Why? Because if it is not bio, Let's say they make glutathione from some supplements, but there's also sometimes toxins inside the ingredients. Okay, so if you concentrate, let's say a vitamin or a peptide inside a product, a commercial product, well, please, if you have the choice, do yourself a favor, take the bio. Yeah, because a lot of toxins, let's say pesticides, PFAS, etc., all those things that you do not want to have in your body, is sometimes concentrated in commercial products for vitamins, omega-3 or something. Yeah, so peptides come from the diet also. Let's take another view on proteins. What is the primary structure? The primary structure of a protein is the polypeptide chain. Yeah, the sequence of the amino acids according to the code that was found in your DNA. That's the primary structure. Yeah, so the following order of the amino acids, that is the primary. And of course, every polypeptide chain has some internal charges, a voltage, according to the electron wave around it. And that will make a local fold. Yeah, because it is electric, so it folds together. Yeah, and it must be checked by some internal systems if it gives the exact tertiary structure, which is a three-dimensional shape. Yeah, and that is making the protein so effective. Yeah, so the three-dimensional shape, that is what you need to have. The three-dimensional shape. That is creating the effectiveness of the protein. And in some cases, multiple proteins will make a complex together. What do I mean with that? Let's say hemoglobin. I will come in a few moments to hemoglobin. So from peptide to protein is making the chain longer and longer, but it is depending on the 3D model if it is effective or not effective. So if the folding itself was wrong, if it is misfolded, then it could here create a disease like Creutzfeldt-Jakob, Creutzfeldt-Jakob or mad cow disease, because many brain diseases inside the cows, how did it enter the food chain? Because in the slaughterhouses, they take out the brains and put it inside the hamburgers or whatever. Yeah, but that is creating misfolded proteins because cow proteins are not the same as human proteins. So proteins, when misfolded, can cause harm to the body. So the body takes care about the three-dimensional structure, and if a normal healthy person is producing by coincidence a 3D structure that is wrong, it should be corrected. Yeah, and there's a correction system inside the body. But if it is rightly created in the 3D structure, then it is creating a very nice effective structure inside the cell. So the folding itself is very important. You see here, so this is the primary structure. Yeah, this is the primary. This is the chain, but this is the three-dimensional structure. Yeah, so you see here also that is also creating a helical structure. What does that mean? If this is a helical structure in the protein, what is it forming? A coil. And if it creates a coil, then it has also a specific magnetic field inside the coil. And if it has a magnetic field inside the coil, then it must also have a specific frequency. So the frequency of the three-dimensional structure is different from the primary chain. We'll see that in a few moments. This is an example of the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a structure of 4 different proteins. You see here protein alpha 1, alpha 2, and beta 1 and beta 2. And here in the center, you see here the iron atoms that can bind to oxygen. So it is a very intelligent structure here. So first step is convert DNA in mRNA, and then messenger RNA in step 2 will form the peptides. And then the peptides must be lengthened to make a protein, and then it must be folded in step 3. And then in step 4, we add also the iron. And then in step 5, we mix them with their 4 elements together to form a single hemoglobin molecule. So to say, I must admit, when you should give someone a Nobel Prize for intelligent design, you should give an intelligent design to your creator. So this is very intelligent design. And it has the optimum for the uptake of oxygen in the blood, but also the optimum for losing the oxygen inside the tissue. So it brings this oxygen where it is in need. So that brings us to what we already said. What is an enzyme? An enzyme is a protein that stimulates a chemical reaction. Therefore, we can call it a catalyst. So here the blue is the substrate that must be split into parts, but the enzyme does the trick because it has the electrical forces to break the bond between the 2 elements. So there was formerly a bond between those 2 elements, but that bond was strong. In that case, we need an enzyme with that electric charge to break the bond. And then the enzyme loses up from the end product. So the enzyme itself is a protein, but it has electrical charges. And if it has electrical charges, then of course it has also a specific frequency. That brings us to Spooky. Because Spooky has many calculation techniques inside the software that convert molecules to a specific frequency. So if you go to Spooky and take a look, and you can look to system, you can see here in the system tab, here you can find all those different calculations. Let's say here MW to Hertz is molecular weight, and molecular weight is here this specific number. All those frequencies are already captured inside a formula. So that brings us to the easy task to pick up from the web any construct of, let's say, an enzyme or a protein or a peptide to find molecular weight or find a frequency. That's what we want to do. So we don't need to bother about the formulas because I double checked all those formulas and it is 100% correct. What Spooky does is very good. I must admit that a few technicians did the trick very, very well. So it is quantum mechanics, and that brings us to, let's say, the 1900s in the former century. In the previous century, around 1900, 1920, they found out that every molecular system had a specific frequency related to what Einstein said, the square of the light speed, depending on the mass. Yeah, and the mass here in this formula, frequency is molecular weight times square light speed divided by the number of Planck. And then you find the frequency. Yeah, so you don't need to bother about calculating because the software calculates it for yourself. So if you go to the Spooky, you see here a screenshot of Spooky. Every database is broken into pieces. Let's take a check. Programs. Here you can see it is broken into pieces. Yeah, if I add all the pieces, let's say I want to have here something like penicillin. Yeah, I don't have here, so you tick here on molecular weight, and then you find a lot of components, chemical components that were already converted to molecular weight. So it is MW. Let's take a look. Penicillin. Penicilline. So penicillin, go to control, override, and there is your number. And if you do start, it converts automatically the calculation from molecular weight into a frequency inside the range of the specific generator that you have. In this case, it is converted to 21.349 megahertz. Yeah, that helps us to understand that the logic inside Spooky helps us to simplify things. Yeah, I can find things in the database and I tick on programs, and then if I find here on the plus, I activate all the sections from the databases. Yeah, and that is a lot. You can see on the slide here at the right side that the database is very, very long. Yeah, so if you have an infection like streptococcus, simply type some string, few letters of the name that you want to look for. Yeah, maybe it is simpler. Yeah, only for Hulda Clark section, because otherwise it is a needle in a haystack. Yeah, so you can simply pick here, let's say Streptococcus pneumonia, and it has a frequency starting at 366,850 up to 370,200, and it runs for 3600 seconds, which is 1 hour. Yeah, let's take a look. You can see here the dash in between those numbers. So it will start running at the lowest frequency and it will differentiate up to the highest frequency. So it will follow the whole track, yeah, until it is done. And it runs for 1 single hour. Okay, so a lot of sections here in those programs. And what is very interesting, you see here also RRM, RRMD, and molecular weight. Yeah, and that is what we try to focus on in the next chapter. Yeah, so a lot of frequencies are already introduced inside the database. But molecular weight is the calculation inside the software from the weight of a molecule into a frequency. Okay, that brings us to the question, can you add any formula inside the program? Yes, you can. It must be between the two brackets. Here I have, here for example, I was already busy for years creating DNA repair protein programs. I did read a book about anti-aging, and it said that many proteins will help to repair our DNA. So I thought to myself, maybe I can find the formulas for all those proteins that help my body for DNA repair. So if the DNA must be multiplied by the mitosis or the cell division, I thought to myself, every cell makes from now and then a mistake, but that mistake must be repaired. If it is not repaired, then the cell must be destroyed, but that is a loss of energy. And maybe if the mistake was not repaired, the daughter cells will be stick up with the mistaken DNA. So I said to myself, would it be possible to analyze which protein it is that helps in the DNA repair? Yeah, so I did the following trick. Go to internet, find the name of the protein. The protein was already found in the book. Yeah, so it is papaine. Papaine is an enzyme that is already in plants like ananas or mango. Yeah, they make sometimes a supplement from it, papainivores, that helps to protect us. Why is that? Because it breaks down foreign proteins. So if you eat meat, the and the proteins from the meat will be seen by the body as foreign, or it's my enemy. So it must be broken down into pieces. Papain is an enzyme that helps to digest foreign proteins. That means if I know the formula from papain, I would be interested. Simply take the name and add molecular formula papain. Okay,
Yep.
and then you find here, the formula. Yeah, in this case from chemicalbook.com, and then you'll find a formula. Okay, so here you can see the formula. You can choose for the molecular weight or maybe the molecular formula. So I would be interested, because that is the most simple thing, simply copy, then go to Spooky, then here on File, upper left, I will, yeah, okay, just to show where the button File is, here in the upper left. Okay, then click on Create Program, and then find the name. Or maybe then protein. Yeah. And then the frequency, brackets, and then paste the formula. Simply here, I will do it again. So here, paste. That's the formula. And then brackets. That's it. Yeah, so you can here add the description. And then save it. Yes, okay. Then you go to programs. And then here, meat. For digesting meat. And then here, customized. Okay, so this is my program. Yeah. So you can load the program. So load program, to go to control, override. And you see here that it automatically is converting into the molecular weight that was listed also on the website. Start, and then it runs automatically the frequency.
Ron, mag ik
Yes.
nog vragen?
English, please.
Oh yeah, Ron, I would like to ask you something. One way of generating the frequency is also with the molecular weight that you go on internet, you give the formula, then it gives the molecular weight and the monoisotopic molecular weight. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Was it
Yeah.
monoisotopic?
If you put the formula between brackets, it is the monoisotopic molecular weight.
Okay. So the molecular weight on itself is not good for spooky. It must be the monoisotonic. Isotonic, wat waren het?
Isotopic.
Isotopic weight. What is the difference?
Well, the normal website's definition, molecular weight, is rounded off.
Ah,
But the monoisotopic mass is the mass calculated by the list. Yeah, so here in the programs, you can
Yeah,
see here, carbon is 9,
yeah,
hydrogen is 14, nitrogen is 4, oxygen is 3.
yeah,
So if you calculate the atomic mass per atom and then multiply by the number and then add whole sum, then you have a more accurate way because every atom has, let's say, 10 or 15 digits behind the dot or comma.
yeah.
But if you go to the website, yeah, so here I had this one. Yeah, and then here it is rounded off, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits behind the dot.
Yeah,
But if you go here to Spooky and then control, you see here 1, 2,
yeah,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 digits behind the dot.
yeah.
But it starts with 226, which is the same as what here in the website.
Yeah. What would be the therapeutical difference when you only take the molecular weight? Is there some therapy, or do you say from, well, no, it's not functional?
In some cases, the rounded off value seems to work also.
Okay.
But in cases of doubt, I always do this trick. Just stop, then go to settings, and then do a harmonic wobble.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wobbles around the central frequency.
Yeah. Wobbling, I couldn't see so fast. Wobbling, can you give the screen again which
Yeah,
wobble?
okay. I forget to do it slow motion.
Yeah, wobble.
Settings,
Yeah,
harmonic wobble,
harmonic. Or
and then I pick the smallest.
that is the
Dot
0.2%.
0.02% feathering.
Yeah, 0.2.
And the difference between feathering and the other wobbles is the other wobbles do it step size. But I want to have feathering, which is all the steps between.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah,
is a more
yeah,
fine grain wobble. So in case of doubt, I always pick here 0.02% feathering, 0.02%, which is the smallest ever possible here. So, and then start.
And there was steps also on
Yeah,
the
but
side
if you
before.
do it step size, then all the numbers in between the steps are omitted.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in very small differentiations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, step size is something like digital.
Yeah.
Step 1, step 2, step 3. But I want to have all the numbers in between the steps.
Yeah. Analog.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
And then you can see here that it wobbles a little bit around the default value. Yeah.
Do you do that also with monoisotopic weight things, or is that not necessary?
That is depending on the program.
Hmm.
And I try to fix for specific patients exactly what I test on the person.
Hmm.
In some cases, the persons are improving condition without wobble or sometimes with wobble. I'll explain that later why is that the case.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So here you find a list of different proteins depending on the DNA repair formula. So please read this slide again. Pick the formulas from the screen, and you can do it. Yeah. You can pick it from the web even yourself. Yeah. So there is here a list of GL273, gonadorreline, melatonine, magnesium threonate, tyrosine, ATP, suramine, nicotide, amide, riboside, etc. All those different formulas are tested by me.
Ron, would it be? I would think this would be in the list of John White already.
In some cases, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But sometimes the formula is a little bit different from standard. And then I add simply multiple formulas in one program. Let's take a look. If you go back to the papaine, yeah, it says here C9H14N4O3. Okay, yeah, but maybe there's another formula. Here, this one.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a way of verifying that the formula you are using is actually correct?
Oh, yes. I come to that later. That's how I do the test.
Okay. Thanks.
So if you find another formula on a specific website, here, this papaine is a little bit different. Okay, simply copy. Yeah. Copy, go again to Spooky, and then go to database, edit custom. Then go to the lowest. That is what you did last time. Yeah, and then here, comma, bracket, paste, bracket. Yeah, so you have here two different formulas found on two different websites. So I picked them both. Ready? yes, close, save, yes. And then I here on programs, database refresh. Now you can see here both formulas.
Mhm.
So if you tick this one, go to control, override, you find both formulas. So the difference is a little bit small there.
Yeah. Ron,
Yeah.
normal time is about 3 minutes for one program, for one frequency. And I saw there only 1 second. Is that right when you go back to the screen?
Yeah, I was just about to explain that.
Okay. The
Yeah.
1 second is not right, eh? It's wrong. Or is it
You have to
right?
enclose the formula between the brackets, the square brackets.
Yeah.
So you go to
and
programs.
I see down here, estimated total runtime, 2 seconds. 2
Yeah,
seconds.
I'll explain that later because it
Oh,
is in the slides.
okay. But is it true that you do that? Only 1 second per frequency?
It's depending on the program.
Because that's very fast.
Yeah. I'll come to that later.
It's not 3 minutes.
No.
Okay, then I am okay. I wait. Yeah.
Okay, we go to the slides because I found many tricks. Good. Therefore, we have seen here the proteins. You can do that by your own formula. But now there is already a peptide preset. What is a peptide? A short chain of amino acids, and they have a lot of functions. All those different peptides have specific functions inside the chemistry of the cell. There was someone that was very enthusiastic about peptides. His name was Joel Sternheimer, and he was a fanatic mathematician. And he had the idea that he was able to simulate the peptides using a sound and reproduce the sound in loudspeakers and then see on the plants if they grow faster. So he had a specific way of calculation the specific peptides. So he found that a peptide is not enough. It must be a collection of peptides that do the trick. We'll come to that here in a few seconds. Today, the model is known as resonant recognition model. Yeah, we'll explain that in detail. Why are peptides as presets so powerful? They are really working. And the mathematicians, they fine-tuned the programs according to the need of the cell. Yeah, so this is what John White himself says about it. And I must admit, this is really working. Yeah, I have seen some patients. One said to me, I had some arrhythmic heartbeat, so the rhythm of the heart was somewhat fluctuating, but was not normal. I did run peptides for 2 days. Okay, gone. And I admit that sometimes it was really effective to do peptides in a few days and then heal the situation. There's a large book inside the peptides. Let's take a look where to find the book. Yeah, you have here, go to presets, then go to JW Peptides, and there is the book. So if you start the book, it is a book of, let's say, 2,852 pages. Yeah, so it is a very large book. And if you want to know anything about it, simply tick on find and let's say muscle. Yeah, and then you'll find anything that is related to muscle. Yeah. muscle growth. Yeah, so I found here also muscle growth peptides. Simply go to muscle. Muscular strength. Yeah, very interesting. It says here, it gives here 6 peptides related to the strength of peptides in the muscles. So for me, I'm interested in doing exercises in the fitness gym. I started to do peptide for muscle tissue. Oh my God, I'm 73 years old and my muscles did still grow. Never had that before. Okay, yeah, so peptides are very interesting. So you have here remote, and then it is filled with all the peptide presets. And also there, if you type something like muscle, you find here all the different collections of things that you want to have. Let's say muscle regeneration. Okay, you have here 5 proteins. Yeah, okay, you go to programs. It's already loaded. Simply go to control, override, and there you go. And then start. And what you will see here in a few moments, that it runs and runs and runs. So it is here, every peptide is only 1 second.
Yeah.
Divided by a quarter of a second. Okay, I stop here. Take a look at programs. Here you can see the list of peptides.
Yeah.
And it says here, you have here only 10 cycles in one program. And they are separated by a quarter of a second. Because you see here in this run, yeah, you can here deviate, let's say 275. Here, control, override, and then it is upsized to 0.28 seconds. Yeah, here. And the packing frequency is the space between the proteins. Okay, I come to that now. Go to the slides. So this is what they did. Someone did try to follow the molecular weights rounded off to a specific note. And they call that protein music. It's really true that people did try to play the piano, especially for the plants. And they did find that the growth of the plants did improve. So what does this person do? He calculated the sound of the proteins. And the sound of the proteins were replayed for the plants. Oh my God, that was really interesting. Yeah, so you can find music, and if you are able to play this music, you can play that for your plants and watch them grow. The opposite is also true. It's the same peptide, but played in the in the opposite way. So the notes are longer and the pitch is lower. Yeah, so the tone is low and the rhythm is low. So one step back here, short notes, high tones. So that is a stimulation effect. But a slowing down is an inhibition effect. So if you replay this kind of music for the plants, they will grow slower. Okay, that's a very interesting conclusion. So let's do a demo here. I will start here from YouTube, this little tones. That's strange, huh? What is the effect of the music? You have short notes and a staccato between the notes. There's a little break between the notes. So it is not no, it is staccato. Yeah, and that is the switch over. And then switch over needs also some time. For that reason, you can see here in this screenshot a very, very long list of all those peptide presets. I go to here, go to peptide presets, here, throw them away. You can see here it is already upsized to presets. Number is 1915 presets. That's amazing. Yeah, so a few hundreds were already added to the range. So there is nearly nothing that is not already listed into this range. Yeah, simply go to programs, and then is here the reason why any protein is in the replay only for 1 single second. Why is that? Because if you play that for 30 minutes, then it has an inhibition effect. But you want a stimulating effect. Push, 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 push. Very short push, and then in between the pushes, you have a small break. Yeah, so how is the break fixed? Yeah, it says here, by standard, it is a quarter of a second between the frequencies. Yeah, so go to control. Here, replay. Okay, I hold them here. Okay, so you can see here in this list, I find here 660 frequencies. That is because the program is running 10 times after each other. So if I pick here only one cycle, then it is 16 minutes. Yeah, and then it runs only one cycle. Yeah, and between the notes, there is here also a break of 4 seconds. Yeah, so I have here 1, 2, 3 notes and a break of 4 seconds. Why is that? Because the notes make the music, but the break, the pause between the notes is also making the music. Yeah, so all those proteins, those peptides are grouped together. Okay, so myself, I did one, of course, to test, is there an option for testing? Yes, and I found a way. So in the peptide presets, you find a very long list of all the different ranges of peptides, and they run for the intracellular effects. That is important. That's what we want to know. Yeah, why is that? Because peptides are working inside the cell. So it is an intracellular function. Keep that in mind for the rest of the day. So they are played as a 1 second note with a pause of 1/4 of a second in between. And one single peptide contains several notes. I will demonstrate that also. So here, stop, programs. I have here 5 peptides, but what happens if I have one single peptide and then only one cycle? Yeah, I can see one peptide is 1, 2, 3 notes. So we don't use one single note. No, we have here 3 single notes that make up one protein or one peptide. Yeah, that helps to understand. Yeah, so please add it again. muscle. Muscle regeneration. Okay, there we are. And then I pick number 5. Go to control. So this peptide is made of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Here, one large range for one single peptide. So the amount of frequencies for one single peptide here is 130. Yeah, it is running only. Oh, yeah, here. Do it again. Eight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so a long range of frequencies, all related, calculated on the basis of molecular weight, because it says here M, molecular weight. Yeah, but of course, the preset itself looks like a large block wave. Yeah, and that large block wave is looking here upwards. Yeah, with the positive section in 20 volts. Yeah, so for us it is important to see that peptides are already in the presets. Yeah, and the whole sequence is made up of several different peptides. Yeah, so they are played as a molecular weight. Therefore, I needed to explain what the hell is a molecular weight. What is a dwell? A dwell is the amount of seconds for every frequency. In this case, it is 1 single second and a break of 1/4 of a second. What if also the audio frequencies can work? I would suggest that you do a test then and replay with a loudspeaker here and cut the range of the frequencies down to 20,000 hertz, because a loudspeaker will not work above 20,000 hertz. So you have to do this one. Programs, yeah, leave it as it is. I pick here presets, so all 5. Yeah, and then go to settings. Yeah, but yeah, it is misleading. Yeah, because it says the frequency, if the frequency is higher than 20,000.
Oh, zo, ja, dan moet het afkappen. Ja.
Yeah, so then it stops counting, and then now we should then see frequencies below 20,000.
Duidelijk.
Yeah, 15,000, 9,000. Because if you have here a loudspeaker connected, and then of course 20 volts is too much, then I would suggest that you go to settings for a normal loudspeaker. Yeah, let's say half a volt, it should be okay. Otherwise you burn the speaker and you cannot sit in the room anymore. Yeah, okay, that is what you do normally with the settings. If you want to do, so I corrected. So that explains that even if you use a loudspeaker and reproduce the peptides, let's say auxine, for the plants, and they start to grow. That's what they did with the notes, short notes and a pause between the notes.
Ron, I have a question. When you do it by remote for the plants, then you have to put a leaf between the remote?
I never thought about it, but yes, you could be right there. Because you talk to the DNA of the plant itself directly.
Yeah, and when you do it by a frequency, by a tuner, by a radio, then you can treat a lot of plants together.
You put the plants just before the speakers.
Yeah, okay. And with the leaf, it's only one.
One single plant, because
Yeah.
it is the same, or maybe the multiple plant leaves in one remote.
Is there any speaker you recommend, or does anyone do the job?
Wide range speed, wide range speaker.
Okay.
But be aware that you must set the voltage low enough.
Yeah, to don't blow it up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's better to start with a tenth of a volt than
Yeah,
start
yeah.
with 20.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it is poof, gone.
Ron?
Yeah.
When I think on a plasma bulb, then you use very high frequencies, and that is very specific for this peptide things. But when you go down in the harmonics, down, 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 until below 20,000, then the specificity is then maybe also lower, or is that not true?
No, okay. You have here the settings for plasma.
And that is very high frequency, but you take the subharmonics of the real frequency, and I think it's less specific than the real frequency when you use sound.
If somebody replays it on the piano and that already has effect,
Yeah.
but that is not calculated with that accuracy,
Yeah.
because it is a note on a piano string.
Yeah.
So even in that case, it is the interval between the notes that does the trick.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at muscle regeneration, especially on the plasma device. If you go to settings, and then you see here the normal plasma settings.
Yeah.
In this case, it will start here. Yeah, and then do the limitation down to something below 3 megahertz. Because the plasma device is not generating frequencies above 3 megahertz.
Yeah.
It's always below 3.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is why they have several presets for several equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, for laser, for plasma. Here is for plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remote scalar device. I must admit that scalar device also is very effective.
Okay. Especially for these kind of presets, scalar.
Oh yes, yeah, because it is the field that does the trick.
Yeah.
Additional to the frequency.
Okay. And
So scalar waves have the effect of generating more bioenergy in that scalar field.
Yeah.
More than only the sound of a piano or a loudspeaker. Okay, that comes to the question that was already discussed. How accurate is the molecular weight formula? Well, in some cases, this is not the most effective way of generating a frequency. Why is that? Because I already said that the three-dimensional structure of the protein, that does the trick in the bio way. Okay, but how is the effect of the three-dimensional structure depending on the folding of the protein? Okay, so that must give us extra accuracy if we know the way that the electron cloud is folded around the molecule. Okay, so in this case, if you go to Wikipedia and find here the hydrogen configuration, the electron cloud, so the electron is rotating in a specific way around the nucleus. Yeah, you can see here that several patterns are defining the electron cloud and has a specific probability in the density of the cloud. Okay, so let's argue there. If that is the simplest molecule possible, the simplest atom possible, one single proton and one single electron around the proton. And then it can also be found on different locations inside the atom. Okay, let's take a look at the way that we take a picture of the protein. The blue part is the positive charge and the red part is the negative charge. I already said that a protein has positive and negative charges. In science, in physics, we know that everything that is negative is related to the electrons. So we have to know where in the molecule are high-speed electrons. And I already said something. If you have here a helical structure, yeah, so here, yeah, that is what you find here. Yeah, so helical structures form a specific pattern, like a magnetic coil. So why bother about molecular weight if we are interested in the way how the electron circulates around the protein? So there is a scientific way of doing that, and I must admit that a few clever students were able to predict the molecular structure of a protein according to the electrical charges inside the chain. So the old hypothesis was that an enzyme was a lock and key model. Yeah, so the lock and key model is they connect, break, and lose. Yeah, but the modern style is the new hypothesis that old hypothesis is no longer effective. Why not? Because they found out, and please take a note at the yellow line, in every living cell, and we have 30 billion cells in our body, every single cell has per second 100,000 chemical reactions. Every cell, every second, 100,000 chemical reactions. So that must be an enormous activity inside the cell. Okay. And that if the old situation was true, then by coincidence, the enzyme will find the substrate just by coincidence? No, they said. Then it would never take place because there was no time for it. In all those high-speed reactions, the molecule must know where the opposite molecule must be to come together. Okay, so they found that there was here a frequency, a resonance frequency into the intermolecular forces to recognize where is my counterpart. Yeah, and that is why the new technique called RRM is coming into the place. So please take a look at this way of producing frequencies. Here, this is a molecular way of taking a look at the estrogen receptor. You can simply type here molecular dynamics in YouTube and you would find things like this. And you can see the enormous activity inside the vibrating molecule. So the coil is rounded off in the helix and it vibrates in itself, producing electrical waves. And that electrical wave will produce, of course, a magnetic frequency. And that is the reason why we are interested in magnetic resonance structures. Here also take a look at the cellular wall. If the cell must admit to allow a molecule to enter, it must have a gate. Yeah, let's say this could be the gate where the sugar can enter the cell. Okay, but anyone else must be blocked. Yeah, so if it is sugar, it must be allowed. So the gate itself has a specific shape that allows sugar, but nothing else. Yeah, just take a look. Yep, enter. Yeah, and then block. Yeah, so when something enters the cell, the gate will close. Yeah, so the gate is open and close whenever the cell has the need for a specific chemical molecule. So the protein gate is a door with a lock. Are you the one that I want? Oh yes, then you are allowed to come. But anyone else is refused. That is an enormous intelligent construction. That is, yeah, in my opinion, you can think what you like, but in my opinion, this is only the hand of our creator. Yeah, because it will allow only what I need, what the cell decides want to have. Okay, so there must be inside the cell an analysis. How is the balance? What do we need today? In this second of the day. Okay, and then all those vibrations, 100,000 chemical reactions per second. So there was someone in the eastern part of Europe, yeah, and that person, Cosic, was a lady, was very intelligent lady. She decided to try to fix a resonance model. How could a molecule find its counterpart? And she found that two parts have the same frequency, but with the opposite charge. And you know, opposite charges will attract, same charges will repel. So they have the same frequency, but opposite charge. And then they can find each other. So, and this is what they call the resonant recognition model, RRM. And they can calculate with a specific formula what is the most characteristic frequency in this kind of protein. Yeah, and they demonstrated that they found on the long range up to 1000 angstrom, which is 100 nanometers, which is in molecular way is a long range model, that the model will find the protein that wishes for. So the cell decides what do I need, and then it tries to resonate in the frequency that attracts a molecule in the opposite frequency. Yeah, same frequency, opposite charge. So that is very, very intelligent. So what did they discover? They discovered that every protein has a dominant frequency. It's not the molecular weight, but it is calculated on the basis of the frequency of the protein itself. How do they do that? They find the sequence of the protein, and the sequence of the proteins are the linked amino acids, and they give all the amino acids a specific number. Yeah, and then they discovered that the molecules that were attracted by that protein have the same frequency but the opposite charge. How do they calculate that? So they need the sequence. So the sequence is what we discussed in the beginning. So we start with DNA. That is step 1. Then we take a look for messenger RNA. step 2, and the messenger RNA is introduced in the ribosome, and there it is converted into a peptide, step 3, and multiple peptides will form a protein. So if we have the sequence of all those amino acids link by link, every amino acid gets an electron potential number related to the charge of the amino acid. And then they try to do a digital signal analysis to find the sequence, to find a frequency. And then they did find for all those different molecules a specific active frequency range related to the molecule on the basis of the change in the link. Yeah, all those amino acids have a specific primary following order, and of course also a three-dimensional structure. How did they convert it to a normal frequency? They gave it a number. Yeah, it is a size, the length of the string, divided by 201. Yeah, and that comes here in that kind of table. Here you see here the protein. Yeah, the protein, in this case, it is cytochrome C. Yeah, nanometers is the optical absorption frequency. Yeah, it gets here an RRM range and the opposite value, and here a number, yeah, a range number, and you can see here in the list all that numbers are more or less dancing around the number 201. One step back. So 201 is a experimental number that it is the dividing number to find frequencies. Yeah, so they calculated on a specific digital string what is the following order of the proteins. Yeah, all those different amino acids were forming a string, but the string itself gets a charge number for every different amino acid. Yeah, and then they found a specific way of calculating the ideal frequency range of a specific molecule, depending on the electron cloud around the molecule. That gives us an opportunity to find frequencies that brings us to, yeah, maybe resistant bacteria. What is the problem with resistant bacteria? It's a question to you. Can anybody tell me what is the problem with resistant bacteria?
They don't do anything more.
We don't have any chemical destruction. Yeah. So antibiotics will not help in the future. Why not? Because in agriculture they spray on the field pesticides. If they put the grain in the silo, they put antifungus chemicals inside the silo. They link together in the next generation the bacteria that survive. And the bacteria that survive are our biggest enemy. If somebody comes to the Netherlands after a holiday in Spain and he goes to the hospital, they are standardly always asking, have you been in Spain inside the hospital? And if you say yes, they put you in isolation, in quarantine. Why is that? Because they know that the physicians, the doctors in Spain, use a lot of antibiotics, which we in the Netherlands don't use anymore so much. So if you come to Holland from the hospital in Spain, they know that the patient probably has resistant bacteria. But the nice thing is those resistant bacteria are not resisting against frequencies. Yeah, so in that case, someone could help himself with frequencies where the antibiotics will not help anymore. And I have had a few cases that I've seen before. So take a look at this picture. The peaks in black are the frequency peaks that were found with an absorbing test, a light absorbing test. And the yellow part is the RRM frequency range. That means the yellow part is the theoretical calculation. And they did find the exact spot, the sweet spot, where the detection of the frequency was found before. Yeah. So in this case, this is a picture of a beta-lactam penicillin, and the peaks are found in the lab from this physical penicillin. But the yellow part is the theoretical calculation of the frequency. And what is amazing to see here, they got it right. Yeah, for that reason, they did introduce RRM in the Spooky database. So let's take a look at Spooky. Here I have programs. And then I have here this one, I switch them off, RRM. Okay, let's take a look. For RRM, I have here a list of, here it says here, 1065 organisms. Yeah, so it is bacterial organisms. So they found the most effective frequencies, and here in this case you see here some virus have 3 frequencies that are specifically working. Here IG virus is having here only 2 frequencies that are typical, but viruses, bacteria are here in the list. So I type here strepto. Is there a streptococcus around us? Yes. Yeah. If somebody has stiff joints, stiff knees, I would suggest that you pick Streptococcus mitis. If you have here pus around spots in the skin, Streptococcus pyogenes. It is the flesh-eating Streptococcus, Streptococcus pyogenes. If you got it inside the body, you have a problem. Yeah, Streptococcus pneumonia. So these are the most typical frequencies in that specific bacterium. Why do we know that? Because they calculated with RRM calculations what is the most typical protein inside that Streptococcus pneumonia. And so if we picture this Streptococcus pneumonia frequencies on the response on the patient, the Streptococcus pneumonia will disappear. Yeah, and that is the nice thing that we can do with RRM. And I must admit, this is a very intelligent solution to find regeneration for patients. Yeah, the same is for RRMD. So I switch this one off. RRMD, that is a chemical substance. Yeah, chemical substance. Wow, long range. It says here 10,679 elements. Wow. Okay, let's say penicillin. amoxicilline, very effective. Let's take a look. And I pick here the same as here, RRMD. Pick. Okay, let's take a look. Only once. It runs for 21 minutes. Yeah, and that is the same as here on the list, 21 minutes. Yeah, so in this column is the standard time. Okay, what happens there? So you could combine all those things. The combination will have the effect. Okay, so if amoxicilline can help, yeah, that's the way to go. So I pick here also Streptococcus. Streptococcus pneumonia. Yeah, then I can have in one program amoxicilline and Streptococcus pneumonia. Yeah, so I know that the bacteria are not able to defend themselves against those frequencies. They can defend themselves against chemical components. What is the normal working effect of an antibiotics? It is attaching to the cell wall. It breaks open the cell wall, and then the bacterium dies. But this is internally. The most effective way to treat the patient is then this way of working.